Hey guys, Vinnie Mirchandani. Real pleasure to have David Watson overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge. David is executive in residence at AMA's fund Health2047. I think I first met David when he was CTO at Kaiser Permanente. And before that, he was at Baxter. After that, he was at Oracle, a number of startups. He is Mr. Healthcare as far as I'm concerned. So this is going to be a really interesting conversation on, what went wrong, what did go right, what went wrong in the recent crisis, and what changes we can expect, or you're seeing in the healthcare system, at least in the US. David, thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself and Health 2047.
Vinny, well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. By way of background, Vinny hit the high points, but I'm one of those rare birds that's been in multiple parts of healthcare. I started in pharma with Allergan and Baxter, learned the research side pretty deeply there, as well as supply chain. And then I moved over to Kaiser, where I was their CTO for 7 years, was responsible for their enormous Epic implementation and a lot of work on refactoring the health plan systems that they had. And then in 2007, when I left Kaiser, I took a sabbatical and recharged my batteries. And then as my friends at Kaiser said, I went over to the dark side, to the health IT vendor community, because what I wanted to do was learn more about where the future of the digitization of healthcare was going to go. And the vendors were leading the way. Leadership was not coming from the health systems and the payers. And so I went over there to learn and participate in that evolving story, and have been there pretty much ever since. As you said, Oracle, MediAnalytics, which is a cloud-based analytics platform, and several others. So a lot of diverse experience, and still having a ton of fun working in healthcare.
So tell us a little about Health 2047. What's the AMA doing there?
Yeah, so I've been affiliated with them for the last 2 years, and Health 2047 is the innovation and venture arm of the American Medical Association. Their CEO, Dr. Jim Madara, approached the membership with, instead of sitting in our overstuffed chairs complaining about what the digitization of healthcare is doing to us, let's participate in defining what digital healthcare should be and make sure that it's for the benefit of our patients and our physicians and clinical staff. And so they created Health 2047 with a significant investment, and they look at new areas of investment in health IT and in healthcare delivery services that can help to augment the current system and help drive that definition of what digital healthcare should end up being as we evolve from the first generation with the EMRs. And so it's been a real pleasure to work with them. I have an opportunity to learn from the AMA and advise them. And working with Health 2047, I get to see some pretty interesting startups in the health IT space.
That's great. Well, Dave, in the last 3 or 4 months around the world, we've seen healthcare heroics, right? Pop-up hospitals, telemedicine take off, vaccines getting fast-tracked. It's amazing. You didn't think that was possible in a couple of months, but you have a front row seat. Tell us about some heroics you've seen.
So several things. First of all, I want to acknowledge nurses, physicians, and the affiliated clinical staffs, because they've really done a heroic effort under some very trying circumstances. And the kinds of things that it's highlighted is deficiencies in supply chain, being able to pivot reasonably quickly around things like supply chain needs. We've all heard about the PPE shortages and the heroics around that. But their ability to improvise to the benefit of their patients and their risk tolerance are all very interesting observations to make with respect to the clinical staff broadly. Telemedicine has been around. We dabbled with it at Kaiser back in like 2001 and 2, but it was always experimental. And telemedicine has slowly gained some traction, but the pandemic and the shelter-in-place orders forced the issue of adoption. Friends of mine at UC San Francisco, one of the big health systems here in the Bay Area, before the pandemic, they were at about 2% of telehealth visits. As of about 3 weeks ago, they were over 50% of all outpatient visits were being done via a telehealth facility that they had. And so do I think it will stay at 50+%? I don't think so, but I do feel pretty strongly that sure as heck it's not going to go back to 2%. Yeah. And so the pandemic, as with a lot of changes, was a forcing function to create an adoption curve. And, you know, Seema Varma just said that they're going to look at pricing because reimbursement for telemedicine was always very low in the old model, and making it more attractive for the providers to adopt, I think will drive that. And from the consumer perspective, which unfortunately in healthcare is more of an afterthought than a forethought, but I'd much rather pop on a video like you and I are on and spend 10 minutes with my physician about something that's, you know, like a cold or whatever, and resolve it that way than have to take half a day off from work and drive to the clinic and see the physician and spend my whole afternoon futzing around, you know, on a fairly minor medical issue. So I think this one is now here to stay.
Great. Well, you know, along with the heroics, it seems like we've seen a lot of chaos too, right? A lot of elective surgeries couldn't happen, a lot of labor shortages by region. You know, it just seems like for the amount of money we spend on healthcare, it just, maybe I'm too much of an analyst. It seems like we haven't gotten value for money in the last couple of months. Tell us your perspective.
So, you know, the pragmatist in me says you get the healthcare you pay for, and that's what we've gotten. And with, you know, I've heard a number of very smart people refer to the pandemic as a black swan event. And if you accept that logic, it's very hard to plan for something like what has just happened and what we're working through. But I think, you know, there are, you know, elective treatments deferred has really hit any number of hospitals financially. You know, the labor issues, you're in the middle of a pandemic, you think you need all the clinical staff you can get, yet every day you read about more healthcare workers being laid off. And a lot of that is on the ambulatory side, where a lot of the work there has just diminished to just important or critical items. And so, you know, things are misplaced. Some of that labor can be promoted into a hospital setting, but some of it, there's not enough capacity to accept that. So, you know, there have been a lot of short-term dislocations, labor, financials, supply chain, we just touched on a few moments ago. But there's also some pretty positive things, you know, the telemedicine that I just touched on. And I think the big thing is for those who will take the time to learn is how to be more resilient when something like this happens. Because I don't think this is the last pandemic we're going to have, but everyone acts like it's the first one, and we had one less than 10 years ago with H1N1. So, you know, let's learn and apply the lessons so that we have more flexibility in supply chains and things like that. So when the next one happens, because they always do, it's just a matter of when, we're better prepared for those with plans and capabilities that clearly we were short of this time around. Yeah.
So David, as a, you know, let's look at it from a MBA case study perspective, right? It seems like everybody's salivating to enter the healthcare space. You've seen auto companies jump in to make ventilators. You've seen everybody make PPE. You've seen distilleries make hand sanitizers. we're seeing Amazon, Apple, Google go at the market from different perspectives. Is this just, but on the other hand, we know the healthcare system is structurally ingrained. Things don't happen overnight. What do you see? Put on your, MBA hat. How is this market going to change? Or is this just short-term flurry of interest? I had a CEO tell me, he says, Vinny, you guys were telling us for the last 10 years, you need to become a digital company. Now you're telling us we need to become a healthcare company because there's so much opportunity to enter different segments of healthcare. Give me your cynical or other perspective on that.
You know me too well, Vinny. So, these new, and I will call them temporary entrants, where you've got car manufacturers making ventilators. And I like the notion of distillers making sanitizers. You get that bourbon flavored sanitizer going. But I think there's a distinct difference between mobilizing for a crisis like we have just done. A lot of people have used war analogies. Even though I'm a Marine, I'm going to try to stay away from those. But mobilizing for a crisis is very different from being a market entrant with long-term aspirations. And so I don't think that this is the new normal, where GM is going to be a medical device manufacturer in the near future. I could be wrong, but the cynic in me says no. Healthcare changes slowly. It's both an issue and an opportunity. But I think that the resilience lesson that I just referenced, if applied, will allow for some other adaptations and adoption that might not have been considered before the pandemic. But this distillers making sanitizer and car companies doing PPE, I do not think is the new normal.
How about technology vendors, right? So Apple and Google are collaborating for contact tracing, right?
Yep.
Amazon's already into a bunch of different healthcare subsidiaries and so on. Do you see them becoming more players in digital health, or as we move to a new world of more pop-up clinics, more telemedicine, etc.?
I'm cautiously optimistic, but cynicism still rules my perspective on this question, in that I've watched for more than 20 years as various, I'll call them interlopers, have attempted to invade the healthcare domain back to the late 90s, when Jim Clark founded Health2047 and proudly declared that he was going to fix healthcare coming out of the tech world. And that didn't go so well. And we've seen many others since then. I think that some of the resilience issues that we've touched on in the pandemic will open up new entrants. I think they will have to become a lot smarter about healthcare to be successful entering the market, because the biggest failure I've seen is someone coming from an adjacent space, technology, for example, going, I've got the next best thing to fix healthcare, but not bringing enough domain expertise to understand how to engage the healthcare ecosystem. And these big guys are all drawn by one thing. They sit back, they do strategic planning, they go, hey, this is a $3 trillion industry. We need some of that. And that's great, but don't be stupid trying to enter the market. Look at Amazon real quickly. You made mention, Amazon, Berkshire, JP Morgan created Haven, right? Mm-hmm. And a great name in healthcare, Atul Gawande, was named with much fanfare as a CEO. And in the last 2 years, you see very little result coming out of that effort. And so it's just, I think it's further validation that healthcare is a lot harder than it seems. But as healthcare continues to move down the digital pathway, I think it will open new opportunities for other entrants to move in and provide some innovative experiences that are needed for a strong digital healthcare future. And I think that's the vector they can follow.
So put on your CTO hat. Just about every CIO or CTO I've talked to said, my God, my cloud applications did better in the work from home setting, right? Now, healthcare, most people were still in hospitals and so on, but healthcare has also got a bunch of on-premise. My God, you talked about Epic and you talked about Cerner, and people are still using mums in healthcare. What did you hear in terms of work from home in the healthcare? Was that a hindrance for them, these legacy systems?
So, as is often the factor with change, the biggest issue are the people in charge. So you have legacy CIOs in health systems and in payers that don't appreciate the capabilities that can come with cloud adoption. And in fact, some of the systems they use don't lend themselves to being promoted to the cloud from on-prem. So being thoughtful about how you embrace it. And for some, because they don't understand it, they may be afraid of it. And so they use different arguments to fend off what I think is an inevitability. Things like, oh, well, if it's in the cloud, I'm not in control and it's not safe. Okay, well, I've been a cloud vendor for 10 years, and in the several companies I've been in, I've never once had a breach because I have hundreds or thousands of clients looking over my shoulder, making sure I'm secure and that I have good privacy controls. You know, that's not true with a lot of health systems and quite a few payers who have suffered breaches because they don't make the investment and they don't take the time to understand what they need to do to be reasonably safe. So, you know, I think the cloud, it continues to be a very viable approach to infrastructure, and it's finding cloud suppliers that match your need and will play the healthcare game, because some of them still don't understand HIPAA. And if you're a cloud supplier and you don't understand, you know, the business associates agreement and the liability that you must take, then you can't successfully play in healthcare. It's part of the domain knowledge you just have to acquire to be good at it.
Yep. Let's go back to, you know, you mentioned the next pandemic. The public health side of this, you know, the pandemic modeling, the shutdown, reopen protocols just seem awfully chaotic. You know, I live in Florida. We are used to the National Hurricane Center. You know, the cone of uncertainty has become narrower and narrower every year. I mean, here we've shut down vast swaths of the economy based on pandemic models, which honestly have been all over the place. Do you see that evolving? What needs to change to make that much more accurate?
So if we absorb the lessons from this pandemic, then you should see more investment in public health infrastructure, starting at state and county level, up through national institutions like the CDC. I think one of the things that this pandemic has shown us is that we have underinvested in public health infrastructure, and you can see the confusion and the lack of precision around this pandemic are the symptoms of that underinvestment. I'm less positive in as much as in the demand for public funding. I'm not sure how high on the priority list public health is going to rise, because institutional memories often are quite short. And so I don't know, but my hope is that the lesson is properly absorbed and that counties, states, and the feds better organize and better fund public health so that we're more ready for the next one.
I've been asking everyone this question. So, two-part question. What do you see in the economy? A V recovery, sharp rebound, a U recovery, gradual, a W depending on, by region, we may have flare-ups and so on, or an L, it's going to be dead for a while. And the second question for you is, we're already spending 1/5 of the GDP on healthcare. Is it going to go up? Is it going to go down? Hopefully it'll go down. So give me both your perspectives.
Okay, so on the recovery question, I do not believe you're going to see a V recovery. In fact, timing for our interview this morning, you saw a 900-point drop in the market because of concerns about a rebound in COVID infection, right? So, and the Fed chairman was in the last 48 hours said, don't expect a quick recovery. As you know, I'm an economist by training who happened to trip into healthcare and technology. I think it'll be a longer, more gradual recovery because you just can't. It's not like a basketball. It's just not going to bounce back up to where it was. And there's been some fundamental damage done, especially in small retail and food and beverage and other segments of the economy that are not just going to bounce back. It will take them time. And those segments employ a lot of people. So I don't think it's a V. I don't think it's a U. I don't think it's a W. I think it's, if you smooth the curve, it'll be kind of a linear progression back up with some zigs up and down just to keep it interesting and make sure we pay attention. But I think we probably got 12 to 18 months of varying degrees of pain until we start to emerge into a pattern that's recognizable. And part of that is the uncertainty about a vaccine for the virus, because you don't know what impact the virus will have, hopefully on a localized basis, but potentially more globally. The second question is much more fraught in that we're now at, as you said, close to 20% of GDP goes to healthcare in the United States. I think as a student of healthcare and with a little bit of an economics overview, the challenge we have that makes healthcare as expensive as it is we have a dysfunctional market, and the financing of healthcare is absolutely chaotic. One of the lessons I think that hopefully politicians and policymakers will take from the pandemic is where healthcare is tied to employment. All these people that just got laid off because of the shelter in place, 30 million people lost their health insurance right in the middle of a pandemic. And so I think in a pragmatic sense, disregarding political perspectives, a real discussion around how to fund healthcare more universally and more fairly has to take place, and how payers and providers are engaged in a healthcare marketplace and in a financial system that isn't as dysfunctional and crazy as the one we have, is how you get to a more effective use of dollars to buy the healthcare you need. And if you get to that point, I think you can reduce that 20% of GDP, because the mechanisms in the market, and I'm a market economist, so I will disclose that, but properly working market mechanisms will help to manage that to the right place. And I think it will come down some. I would not expect it to come down a lot. And there's other reasons for that we need a cocktail in an hour for me to go through.
Well, David, I was glad to include you in my book, The New Polymaths. I'd forgotten you're also an economist. So thank you for this very, very, fairly generous view of the healthcare system. A lot of people are very cynical at this point. So thank you for providing that perspective. Stay healthy. And my backyard is pretty good, but not as good as that. So thank you again.
You're welcome, Vinnie. It was a pleasure. Thanks.